New data suggests China is now the world's second biggest arms producer behind the United States. A report by the Stockholm Peace Research Institute estimates China's arms industry is worth around $120 billion. The institute didn't rank China in the past because of a lack of transparency, but new data from some Chinese firms have now been made available. One researcher, however, argues the legalities of the industry in China is greatly underreported. Riccardo Labianco is from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London and joins me now. Now, Riccardo, is it surprising to learn of the extent of China's arms exports?
Well, no, it's not surprising at all for many different reasons. First of all, I would say that economically, China has been growing in the last years, so it's not surprising that they decided to invest the fruits of their economic growth into this field of armaments. Secondly, I would say that China is a permanent seat of the Security Council, and funny enough, even though they should be in charge of the peace and security of the international community, I mean, China is just following the example of other great exporters like Russia and the United States, which happen to be other two permanent members of the Security Council.
And what kind of weapons are they exporting, and who's buying them?
Well, China, according to the figures that we have from several research centers, China is producing and exporting as well a very large range of weapons, from small arms and light weapons like pistols, rifles, rocket launchers, to major conventional weapons like tanks, aircraft, warships. We shouldn't forget about the fact that when a country like China produce armaments and export them, they also produce parts and components of those armament system, and they also produce ammunition. So which basically lead to have a much more continuing relationship with purchasers around the world. About who is buying or receiving weapons from China. First of all, we have also to say that China is very willing to both donate weapons and offer credits to buy weapons, or to simply selling weapons to other countries. According to the figures of CIPRI, of another report, not the one that we are mentioning right now, 70% of the exports of China end up in Asia and Oceania, and the 20% in Africa. Qualitative, we must say that China has a name as a producer of cheaper weapons that often replicate much more expensive armament systems of other producers. So that's also why many countries in these areas of the world look for Chinese weapons.
And what are some of the legal concerns you'd have with China's arms sales?
Well, first of all, we must say generally, it's very important to highlight the fact that international law does not say anything about the production of weapons. Actually, the very arms trade treaty acknowledge an interest of states in producing and manufacturing weapons for lawful uses and transfers. So we must say that unfortunately we are still in a phase where states can actually produce as many weapons as they want. However, we must say that we need to look at a broader picture of international law, and actually international law provides duties for states that send weapons to another state, especially when these weapons are involved in violations of very important rules of international law. Just an example, if weapons from a country end up being involved in the commission of genocide or torture, which are peremptory norms of international law, China, as well as any other state aware of this unlawful use of the weapons, would need to stop their shipment in order to enforce international law.
And just finally,
China would have.
Yeah, just finally,
Please.
How does the rise in China's weapons exports compare to that of the US?
Well, it's to be honest. As we started this interview, I would say that China is probably, with these figures right now, we can assume that China is reaching a point of the same point of the U.S. So basically, it will end up that China doesn't need to export weapons in order to maintain their own domestic production, which means that they are much freer to give their own conditions to the states that receive the weapons. Probably, I would say that geographically, the U.S. are still much more. U.S. armaments are still much more widespread around the world, while China apparently is just maintaining its own influence in just specific geographic areas of the world. I wouldn't be surprised that China will expand its influence somewhere else.
Riccardo Labianco, thank you so much for joining The World.
Thank you indeed.